We have Karl Wienhold of the Cheap Coffee book and Cedro Alto in Colombia. Karl is a consultant and a researcher, organizer of post-colonial rural development and focusing on microeconomics and forestry and circular economics. And of course, you're the author of the Cheap Coffee book, produced by Roast, and it is taking off, I think. I just saw you signing a copy over at the booth. Yeah. And congratulations on that.
Thank you so much.
We, on Keys to the Shop, we've had you on the show to talk about this, and it is in a pretty, I would say, I don't want to say depressing, but when you look deep underneath what's going on in green coffee, you can't help but be just like astounded at the level to which things have gotten out of hand with coffee price crisis and everything else. And so I'm glad to talk to you here at the show, SCA Expo. So maybe the first thing we should talk about here is that there's mechanisms that are at work that maybe we're not aware of, and it's sort of the point of the book. What are some of those mechanisms that have contributed to what we're seeing now in the coffee price crisis?
Yeah, well, what I think is important here is what we normally talk about in these kind of settings is how a price crisis, for example, happens rather than why. And I mean, I describe in the book, based on the literature that's out there, what is going on, how it is happening. The why is not quite as clear, and what I think we should be focusing on now is this. And basically, from the way I see it, this is an imbalance in market power. That all of these problems, like a price crisis, like climate change, and many other things that need to be addressed that are problematic, are really symptoms of an underlying problem, which is this unbalanced power. That is the power to walk away, that A needs B more than B needs A. And given the asymmetrical distribution of key resources in order to operate in the coffee value chain, some actors with certain positions have more options than others. So this is what I'm working on now. Post book is really digging into why these things are happening and what a solution might actually look like versus a fix. Because I think they're two very different things, that the fixes are quite important, right, as long as we're also finding the solution in the meanwhile.
Okay, so in saying that, you're kind of alluding to that a lot of the solutions that we've been proposing thus far haven't necessarily been solutions so much as maybe more surface level than we'd like to admit.
Treatments, which are also important. But the more we treat the symptom, the longer the problem can persist. Which even kind of gives it a kind of sustainability, ironically. So yeah, I mean, these things are also very important, like paying more for a coffee. Specifically, roasters paying more than very low prices for green coffee. This is good. This is important. But for me, it comes down to the ability. The option to or to not do it.
Okay.
And this is like the real paradigm shift that I hope we can get toward.
Okay, so the option to not do it is not there right now for those on the farming end. They're kind of beholden to the market. There's really no feasible way outside of just more pain, right, than they're already going through.
Yeah, I mean, these things ebb and flow, and right now it's a lot better to be growing coffee than it was a couple years ago. Mm-hmm. But the underlying problem has not changed. The power dynamic has not changed.
Okay.
I mean, more income going to producers is allowing them to build the structures and access resources to be able to protect themselves for the next crisis, perhaps. Offering some prosperity that will inevitably start to change the I don't want to say culture, but approach to immediacy and need. But these are very long cycles.
That's a very good point, because a lot of the fixes and the solutions that we put out there, we don't spend very long coming up with them necessarily, but the problem has been going on for much longer, and so we're outgunned in a sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, so then if we're talking about sustainability, which here at the Expo, sustainability is a huge topic. It always is. It's, headlining RICO Symposium and everything else. So how should we be thinking about sustainability when it comes to, what's our goal here with sustainability when it comes to farmers and equity within that relationship?
To me, similar to what I just mentioned, I think this comes down to undermining the kinds of power structures that have led to the dire situation that most smallholder farmers are in now, supporting efforts to change that equation that allow those marginalized by the status quo to access those resources, to be able to change their own situation, to be able to defend their position and ensure their own access to their own sustenance and the things they need, versus corrective actions to essentially donate those kind of things by like farmer tips and this kind of stuff.
Right.
Which is not, there's nothing bad about it, but it's not a substitute. They're not the same thing.
Okay, so does that mean that we have to change our expectations in terms of on the consuming end? Because roasters and retailers typically aren't folded into the consumer category, but we are, for all intents and purposes, on the other side. We're very privileged in that sense. So our expectations of production and even how much we're willing to pay for coffee, what things need to change on our end, and what's our role in actually making these changes happen?
Well, I think on the let's call it the downstream side versus the consumer side, this is everything after the international ship travel. This is I think, again, in my own view, is supporting these kind of organizations that are challenging the status quo, that are distributing power horizontally, allowing those without it, that rely on the goodwill of others to gain their sustenance, to be able to reclaim the ability to do that themselves.
Okay, yeah. And so far, you said earlier that it was better today to do this than it was. What are those hopeful elements that make you say that?
The hopeful elements.
Yeah, it's like you have this hopeful idea of like what things are happening now in green coffee or in being a farmer. Is it the existence of a lot of different things, for instance, a cooperative like yours, or just more organization and power maybe shifting right now as we speak?
Well, I think power is shifting in that farmers are earning more just because the international price is higher.
Right.
That's what I mentioned earlier. That's what I was referring to. That just because of something that's arbitrary to most of the mild Arabica producers in the world. That's the reason for the price rise over the last few months, is helpful. But it could fall at any time. But right now, it is encouraging that this thing is changing, although it may be ephemeral, in ways that are giving smallholder producers more resources to be able to do things in the future. We'll see what they do or don't do. But aside from that, I think there are encouraging developments today. Not like tangible fixes or technocratic solutions that can be deployed and implemented and just make everything better today, but these kind of conversations. The fact that you all invited me to this interview today, I think this is really encouraging, because these are kind of radical thoughts that maybe a few years ago we wouldn't really be talking about, because they're uncomfortable. And I think accepting that discomfort is happening more and more on this show floor, the conversations that I'm able to have in the hallways. And these things aren't immediate. I think a lot of times I have these kind of discussions in Colombia, in the theater, if you will, about like, how do we do it? How do we do it now? Well, if we do it now, we're probably not going to do it right. But I think it's important. It's not the fact that we're talking about this stuff doesn't mean it's going to get better, but it's the first step. So I think it's encouraging that we are talking about it. We are confronting these things, and I think as time goes by, the people that I'm talking about this kind of stuff are moving into more powerful positions in their organizations, are starting organizations, are continuing to learn on their own. There are a lot more resources out now than before, and I mean, as long as everyone can stay true to the facts and these fundamentals without this whole movement turning into marketing, like is somewhat possible, then we could be in for a real change, whatever that may or may look like. I'm not quite sure, but I think we're at least changing our own mindsets in a positive way.
I love what you said about sort of generational change. The people you're talking to now move into powerful positions. And I mean, that's true in lots of different areas of life, where my example of, what a teacher was when I was young becomes who I am as a teacher later. And either for positive or negative, like I will emulate them or I will do the opposite because I didn't like what they were doing. And sometimes we don't have a view of that what's possible in the future. Like we view everything as static, like now will always be forever. Yeah. But where we are now is because people changed their minds in the past. And so we do have the power to do that. And I'm also interested in you expanding a little bit more on marketing and the idea of how it sounds like you're saying marketing kind of ruins things sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I don't think any of us are naive enough to think that it doesn't. But how does the solution spread with responsible marketing or even without marketing? What does that potentially look like? Have there been cases where that's been the example laid in other areas of coffee?
Well, I think this kind of perspective depends on the idea that this is the downstream industry actors that are leading this change, that could use it as marketing content if they so chose. That there's no reason not to. But I think that a kind of long-term solution that makes the whole thing viable will not necessarily come from the downstream actors, traders, roasters, shops, etc. That we're talking about difficulties on the origin side, and I think that paradigm shifts and changes in the power dynamic have got to come from there, and so would not be available up here as much. And I mean, I don't think marketing ruins anything, but just the fact that the idea of sustainability, which is in coffee marketing everywhere, like try to talk to someone who's offering a product without mentioning sustainability, you probably won't. And there's nothing bad about that because we need these kind of shifts to happen. But the problem is that if part of what we're selling when we sell a product is fixing a problem, and that idea of fixing a problem helps us sell the product, then we can't fix the problem, or we will not have that value to offer along with our product anymore. So it gets us in a really weird catch-22 there. And I don't think this is malicious at all. It's just kind of how these incentives and structures evolve over time and get us into a weird place. I hate to be so dark about this, but this is how I see the incentives being structured.
Mm-hmm. No, that is... I feel like you're talking about something that we all think, but we don't talk about even to ourselves. I love what you just said. Like you're perpetuating, or you're almost incentivized to perpetuate the problem so that you can sell the solution.
Be the one who creates the solution.
Yeah. What would happen to all of the people who work in sustainability now if it was achieved? You know what I mean? I mean,
corporate social responsibility in a company. I think a big red flag is when that is in the marketing department, which it often is.
Yeah.
And I mean that just tells you exactly what's going on there.
And when the ideas are being generated by that department, and not necessarily people on the ground like yourself have these ideas, and you have research into these movements. And if you're studying history and studying what's happened in the past so that we can not repeat it, I mean, you don't really see that position in many companies.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll be the first to say I have been guilty of this. I've been extremely guilty of this. I mean, all the transparency reporting and these things that I was coming up with and offering, it was to solve a problem, which was low income for the farmers that I represented. But I was also offering this to try to get clients to try to move green coffee, which is the main reason. I don't know if many people know this, but I resigned as director of Cedro Alto about 9 months ago.
Got it.
In order to make that distinction, because now I'm a researcher. I'm trying to find these solutions and understand these problems, and I can't be worried about alienating my clients, and I don't want the producers that are members of Cedro Alto to be splashed by whatever offensive things I might be saying on places like here.
And here's the thing that I find interesting, and anyone listening to this, that you're a very, I would say, a kind and deep soul of a person, and nobody would think anything malicious would happen, considering you've written this book and you've already been in this research position, technically, even when you're with Cedro Alto. But it's just a human default, isn't it? That even the most benevolent and well-meaning has this duality of like self-preservation, maintaining the status quo for your own sake, even if you're doing something charitable or for the future good.
Right, and I mean, when I'm speaking with smallholder producers every day and seeing their struggles, I can't help but do everything possible to alleviate that immediate discomfort right now, and that may mean, and it has meant, sacrificing, shifting incentives in a more wholesome way down the line, because I can't get out of my head the struggles of today and what I can do to help people today. But I think those functions need to be separated. Somebody needs to be worrying about both of them, but I don't know that the same person can do a great job at worrying about both at the same time.
No, and here's the other thing that's interesting to think about is that we're talking about the downstream, shifting the power from downstream to upstream in a lot of different facets. So we're used to it being on our side, right? However, that same problem exists in the people and the humans on the farming side, where they could exhibit the same kind of like, I want to keep things the way they are because it's good for me. Yeah. And it's interesting to try to find out, are there examples of where people are doing similar things, where they're trying to really understand the problem, come up with solutions, but they're also embracing the fact that they may be getting in the way of the solutions, but they're on the farming side of things.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the idea of charity, the idea of charity being built into to the pricing structure of specialty coffee. And when you lack resources, you experience scarcity on a day-to-day level. You can't buy uniforms for your kid to go to school or whatever it is. You want to do everything to change that right now. But then getting into these kind of paternalistic relationships that rely on the charity of others who say that we're like partners or collaborators, but one is subsisting thanks only to the charity of the other, we get into strange power structures and relationships that, I mean, they're created with good intentions to alleviate discomfort, but thinking down the line, these can creep into kind of awkward things.
Yeah. That's one of the things I wanted to maybe touch on was convenience in our mindsets towards how even with what we consume, we're not really thinking about the downstream impact in our own lives. Like, I'm not even really thinking about 3 months from now for myself, let alone an industry. And so it feels like a lot of the solutions have to be generated by people who are sort of embracing the idea that I need to change. It's not that I need to just, figure out what to do next. It's how do I be next, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think this gets into what I think is really fundamental that I mentioned at the very beginning of this, that and when we see things that are functioning poorly, that there are problems, we just want to fix them, and that's as natural. And this is, good people want to help other people, but at the same time, I think when it comes to this, the quick fixes, the technocratic behavior that I'm going to create your solution, I'm going to get in there and change things, is kind of a short-term way of going about it. That really, in this case, when we're such worlds apart, and thinking about this idea of the power dynamics, what really needs to happen from the consumers is not the question that I always get: how do I help? How do I fix? And you can't. I hate to say it, but I mean the best thing that can be done, I think, my opinion, is that we can get out of the way, dismantle the power structures that marginalize some individuals, and then let them decide what the fixes are. Let them decide what the new paradigm would look like. There's, of course, damage that should be repaired, but I think at a fundamental level, it comes down to not fixing and making better, but removing what's wrong and let what is better and desired by people be determined and built by them.
Yeah, and that gives not only just it humbles us by doing that, and you wouldn't do it unless you really thought through, how am I doing that now inadvertently? Because I don't know that anybody on this show floor or in the industry is just trying to just ring people for all they're worth, and I know that exists out there.
Yeah.
It does, and that's half of the reason why we're here. I think I'd like to believe specialty is special in some ways, but it's not about elevating people to a high status on your bag labels. It's in reality, right? It's giving away power, but you have to know that you have power first in order to give it away.
Right. Yes. Exactly. I mean, this is the essence of this way I tried to view this value chain as a power dynamic, that everybody, everyone at every level of this value chain is an individual with their own interests that is making decisions to pay less, save money, to charge more, to make money, to minimize risk, and this is totally natural and nothing to be criticized. But we're all looking out for our own interests based on very asymmetric access to resources, very different capabilities, and different circumstances. So those with more power in this value chain looking out for their interests makes a much bigger difference than those with very low power looking out for their interests. And little by little, the way value is distributed, the way risk is distributed, and changes and shifts in favor of those with more power and access to more resources, creating what I believe is like a positive feedback loop. And this is what really needs to get changed into the other direction here, in order that this can be a more a more stable thing that works for everyone, even if it doesn't work for some who have benefited from the way we've been going as of late. I mean, we talk about like the raising prices now, and it's really difficult. And this is it's a shame that it's really difficult for a lot of folks who are struggling to maintain their sales, because there's a cost of living is rising in a lot of consumption markets. Coffee is more expensive. It's more difficult to compete. Consumers are feeling pressure in their shopping bill every week. But if the sustainability of one requires the unsustainability of the other on the other side, then the whole thing is then not sustainable. So maybe the sustainable version, economically speaking, is not as big as the one we have now, which is it's a sad thing to think about, because we were talking about making specialty bigger and nicer at the same time. But I think we've got to get comfortable with those hard realities.
Well, I was thinking about making specialty coffee bigger, but then I think it's still the motto of SCA, making coffee better. And better doesn't always equal bigger. Even as we're in the space of phase of coffee now, where we're trying to embrace a lot more coffee. We're trying to buy more coffee from farmers than we have, not just picking the ultra high end stuff. When I hear you talk about how it might not be as big, it's not worrying necessarily, because we've developed this idea that we absolutely need this size. But if you've ever gone without something for a month, like did a fast of like social media or something, you realize I didn't really need it as much as I thought I did. It's just I'm used to it. And if people start taking power for themselves to affect change, we might look at it and say, well, I would have done it better. I have a whole business. I have a corporate entity that would have been slick, efficient, and they might make mistakes. And I think maybe we have to, because we've had the luxury of having this efficient business structure around us, maybe we share our business knowledge, but also allow grace for people to figure it out on their side. Yeah,
we've also had the luxury of not needing to be ultra efficient because the fundamentals allow for it in some cases. And now that's changing. The belts are getting tightened. And it's going to require cuts, and I mean that's going to be painful. But I mean, in some ways, the shoe's on the other foot. Not that that's good or bad or or indifferent.
Right. Well, this has really been fun to talk to you again, in face-to-face this time here at the show. I would encourage anybody to look up the Cheap Coffee Book. You can get that on roastmagazine.com, and I think cheapcoffeebook.com too, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Karl, Wienhold, Cheap Coffee Book, and researcher du jour. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.